Thank you, Azim. It's a bit of a strange one for me normally, coming and talking, but this is really strange. When I got asked to do this, I had a serious case of imposter syndrome. I'm around some distinguished people, some of whom I've actually learnt my medicine from, which is really bizarre. And it's just wonderful to be able to come and talk about healthcare and what are the lessons we've learned from the pandemic. You know, one of the difficult things about being prepared for disaster is you never really get prepared for disaster. I'm very lucky. I've spent the last few years, just to tell you a little bit about me, trying to find out what I want to do. And that means I've been through different systems, acute trusts, mental health trusts, general practice, regional, just to understand how does the system work? Why is it wherever I go, apart from being just a moaning clinician, why do I struggle with the concept that things don't work? And it's partly because training has always been about the individual. As a clinician, I get trained to deal with what's in front of me. But if you start to ask me, fix this, that becomes even more challenging and really difficult. So when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, wow, some great minds in the room. Surely the answer lies in this. Because I do these other talks and I think the answer doesn't lie in those forums. Maybe the answer lies in this. The first thing I said to Fiona was, when she was talking to me, I said, well, you know, it seems a strange audience to be talking to. I really need to think about what the lessons are and what you really need to understand. And I said, are you sure I'm the right person? She said to me, really, really? Mateen, we couldn't get the first two speakers, so we picked you. The other thing I was a bit worried about is the first time I've been on stage since the pandemic. And the last person who was on stage and said something and made people laugh got a slap in the face. So I think the security detailing is very good today, so don't get any ideas. In terms of the healthcare and digital revolution, the reason it's a revolution, and possibly even reform, is because we were pushed into a corner to change at a very quick moment in time. We didn't know what to do, and we had to change. Some good change, some potentially difficult change. And we need to start understanding where those lessons are, apart from all the good that we did, because not all of us are in the room that should be in the room today. So we need to think about how we move forward and be prepared for what might be another difficult time in the coming decades and perhaps even centuries, so we put those lessons down. There are some dates that you'll never forget. You know what's fascinating? This is history. My children will learn about this. I feel uncomfortable talking about it because it always triggers off this memory of certain situations I was in where even as a clinician standing watching on some days 14, 15 people just die in front of me. Helpless, hopeless, very difficult times. We know when we first heard about it in the world, and we know when it first occurred here. So if we are history, we need to teach people the lessons so that we don't repeat it in the same way. Different sectors responded differently. I kind of work in both sectors, primary and secondary. And I saw two different things going on all the time. Our colleagues in hospitals and specialized buildings were very good at the clinical deployment. Really good. The clinician said, let's do it. Let's go and see these patients and work on it. The system wasn't quite ready. Just like we're not ready day to day when we're overwhelmed in the emergency department. We do our very best with what limitations we have. So there were procedures that were stopped. Someone had to make a decision and say, stop doing all those surgeries. That's the one that's going to be the most risk related. And then there were people who said, actually, let's move all those patients and let's not talk about these ones. Let's focus on what's in front of us. Difficult decisions. Who's going to make them? People were struggling. Leaders rose at the time. We saw people really just stand up and say, this is the decision. I'm not sure why. I put everything together. This is what my gut tells me. So clinical leadership has taken a real transformation during this very difficult moment. Primary care, wow, tough. Central colleagues decided to give us advice and say, hey, shut the doors. I'm going to say it, that I didn't shut mine. And the reason I didn't shut mine is not because I was clever, it's because I'd been doing this stuff around video consulting since 2010, back when people said, he's a lunatic guy, this doesn't work. I remember knocking on Azim's door, gave him a bit of a shock, no appointment, just went straight in and said, I'm doing this thing, I think it's dangerous. I need somewhere to talk about it and figure out what's right or wrong. So in my own little way, over 2 years, I figured out, right, the problem with this is, it's technology. And nobody really knows how to adopt this so that we can use it safely within what we do. Briefly about video, because we're short of time today, but briefly about video. Ever since medicine, science, treatment started, people have always been in the room, or the space, or the environment. We see people, we talk to them, we poke and prod them, and we do an exchange, a transaction of something to give them advice or treatment so they get better. For the very first time, you take that whole individual out of the room, and all of a sudden everybody's upside down because they say, what do we do now? So there's a lot about learning how to put this in the right training and system so that people are prepared. And the reason I didn't shut my doors, I trained my staff before I could see it coming. And I said, this is how we're going to do it, these are the things you do, and this is how you continue doing more physical examination in the room. A little bit of builder work, who came in, put their lives at risk to some extent. 10 days, refashioned the clinic, and we were up and running. So I'm not sure that was the right call, but hey, it was done for the reasons that they give. And it probably saved quite a lot of my colleagues and yours out there who are high risk anyway. Difficult decisions. This is some information. I've got some busy slides, but you don't need to worry about it too much. I'm going to tell you the things that are most important. Let's have a look at what happened in the community mainly. Consultations dropped. Face-to-face was dropping. People weren't sure how to deal with it. Initially, through the change as we came out, we've noticed that face-to-face is now going up. But during the early stages, it dropped because people weren't doing enough, because they felt the risk and they weren't sure and they didn't know how to handle it because of all the multifactorial issues related to COVID-19. Home visits were stopped. We started to do these drop-in visits. There were these community outreach teams that were running around in cars and equipment and posting things through letterboxes and saying, tell us what your vitals are and we'll see and make a decision from out here from your front garden. I was one of those people. I remember doing that and thinking, this is just crazy. I don't know how to do this. But I started to just piece together with my colleagues about how it would work. We then saw a major change because the guidance centrally said, move everybody online. Do everything video, online, telephone, whatever you see fit. Actually, the guidance initially said online and video. It later changed to telephone. Today, with that backstory, I'm going to go through what lessons we've learned. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of information how you do digital transformation in a large system so that everybody is prepared to deal with the consequences of difficult situations. And if we start to learn those lessons very carefully, we might actually be in with a chance next time something like this happens. Let's start with technology. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, what does digital transformation mean? Most people don't know. I didn't know when I started doing it. You know, my journey's been a bit strange. Every time I do something, I actually don't know what my job is for a little while. I'm a clinician. I don't understand the terms. It takes me time. So people say to me, hey, you're a systems and transformation digital expert. And I say, right, I've now got to go and translate that to everybody who is in my game, which is clinical world, about what that really means. So we'd start with the definitions. Technology, I remember back to the time I trained at St. George's, and I remember at the time, I met this one guy. What you won't know about me is I'm a product of something called widening participation. I was one of the lucky ones in the early days, and they gave me a shot at this career. And that chap said to me, hey, you know, technology's what you were present for when it was developed. And I never understood it. I still remember those words because it just hit me, because he said, CDs weren't around when you were born, so CDs are technology for you. And I thought, wow, that's profound. I said, that's amazing. That means everything suddenly becomes technology to me. People who are born now are born into a streaming digital world. This is not technology for them. This is normal. Moving around with your phone, apps, this is normal. They call less and FaceTime more. So think about what that means every time you make decisions in your careers and try to advise people about changing how they work. Digital health is a lovely paper by some colleagues in Iran. They did a whole literature review, and they found there were certain terms that were used again and again, because digital health doesn't have a specific definition. It's an area of work. It's something that we do related to the work we do every day. So they put all this together and they came up with this definition. It's about information, people, it's about technology, human health, and improving care. Put that all together and it makes sense. We'll share the reference with you later so that you can have a read of that paper too. Ultimately, when you look at the terms that they found, health comes at the top of it because that's the first priority. Whatever we do digital is already happening in health. We just need to somehow learn how to change and adapt it so that it's easier to digest and we make less errors and we're able to support the work that we're going to do. So keywords to take away: health, technology, use, and information. Remember that every time you write something, every time you do something. That's the message you're trying to send to people. Here's the problem with technology. We use it. Someone says to me, here, have this piece of technology. Companies come all the time and they go, I built this, it's great. It fixes the problem for all of you. And I say, fantastic. What do I do with it? There was a company that made an ophthalmoscope, went bust 2 years ago. They gave me all this expensive stuff they built. They said, it'll be perfect. It's going to fit your iPhone, it's great. I said, great. But they said, but it only fits iPhone 6. I said, okay, what about the other phones? What about the fact that iPhone 7 has just come out? Oh, well, we're going to have to go back and spend some money and build another one. And they built another one, and then they built another one, and they built another one, and then they went bust. And the other problem they were having is no one wanted to use it because everybody said, hey, where's the evidence? Does it actually work? Is it as safe as doing a fundoscopy in someone's eye, just like the opticians? Don't know. That's the other problem with technology. So what happens with technology? You get it, and eventually you put it on the side because you're not knowing how to use it, whether it's safe enough for you to use, and whether it's the right thing. So it falls down this black hole, and it's very difficult for clinicians to come back out of that. So what happened with video in the pandemic is we said, do video for everything, and then we got some crazy people doing some really, really dangerous things on video, and we've got most people risk averse who are just basically doing simple things that they realize, well, I can do that on telephone. I've been doing it for years on that, so they pick up the telephone instead. Really important for people building products, people in research, people in innovation, to understand what are the pitfalls of digital acceptance and transformation within healthcare. And the most common things that we find are the education and training, being able to reflect on something and feedback, because that's what we do best. As clinicians, we understand that actually if someone tells us this works, this doesn't, you need to change this, change that, that and only then will make better, safe clinical service delivery. Risk management. Someone taught me risk management. I went, why are we not teaching this to everybody? The first thing that happens when you come out of medical school, someone gives you something and you say, oh my God, I do not know how to implement this. Clinicians in the room, what were you like the first time you got handed an ECG? I nearly had a heart attack. Forget the patient. It was a nightmare. Why? Because no one teaches you the implementation bit until someone holds your hand and says, right, all that knowledge, this is how we implement it. So the boss comes in, he or she says, or other says, This is how you do it. This is what you need to do. Stand there, do this, do that. Feedback, reflection, go back. They debrief you afterwards. Technology needs exactly the same. These sandboxing things are what the technological world calls simulation, basically. You get a boundary, here's your playground, do what you want, no one's going to get hurt. We need more of that. We need more simulation. That comes through data input from people like yourselves and me who say, here are the common scenarios, here's what we will expect to see, here are the things that we need to do with the technology. I'm going to go through some very brief data with you. Have a look here. This is interesting. So this is recently. This data comes from NHS Digital. I just want you to focus on that yellow bit at the top, which says video, 128,000 video online appointments. They've mixed the two, which is interesting in itself. This is all for London-wide data, by the way. So this is the number of appointments that were booked in the community for the patient population in London. This is what it was in March 2020, at the early stages of when the pandemic had been told to everyone that it's coming. This is what we were doing then, and that was what we were doing now. It's about the same, 127,000. So NHS England, our colleagues say, shut the doors, go completely online and video. So everybody does that, apart from me and a few others. Everybody says, okay, let's shut the doors. Let's go all video online. Let's see what happens. And they start to set up these webcams, lots of expensive purchases. Here, have new laptops. Here, we're going to buy all this software for you. These wonderful companies can give you lots of screen time. They can give you camera visual fields, and you can do loads of stuff. You will be able to do the new clinical way of working. All of a sudden, my phone starts ringing. Oh, I hear you've been doing video consultations. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. This is what happens in April. 4 weeks after. It goes from 128,000 appointments. When the mandatory guidance says move to video online, in a month's time we move to 44,000. How does that work? Why? Because they started it and they suddenly went, oh, I don't know what to do here. What do I do in the screen? Well, I'll just talk to them. And the common thing people say is, how am I meant to examine someone over video? Well, you're not. Not expecting you to do that until we get into the days of haptics in the next 50 years, but hey, that's a mile away. What you're meant to be doing is using it as an elevated triage model, so you can make good decisions of when people need to be seen and when they should come in, because surely, penny drop moment, surely seeing someone adds a little bit more value to your data gathering than just hearing them. And fundamentally, the problem was they weren't prepared. The clinicians weren't prepared. We didn't prepare them beforehand. We waited too long to have this disaster, and then we say to them, here you go, here's some technology, get on with it. It didn't work. It got shoved to the side, the webcams got shut off, back in the drawer. We'll just go back to what we know, telephones. And telephones rocketed during the time of the pandemic. And yes, it's very good for some things. Sometimes you know what it's like. You go to the doctors, you don't really need to sit there and have a chat. Same thing with hospitals. Sometimes you don't need to go there. It's really expensive to have Costa coffee in a hospital. Sometimes you don't need to go there. They can just call you, tell you the update of your result. It'll be much quicker and faster. I think we're learning those lessons. You can see where that dip is during the pandemic. That's another representation of the same statistics. But ultimately, it's about leadership. It really is about that. Time and experience teaches us that it's about making sure the right people are there to deliver the right message. And even if sometimes it feels like it's the wrong thing because people keep telling you, this is not right, it doesn't fit in with the way we do things, you got to keep going. It takes a lot of resilience, a lot of thick skin, and it takes a lot of numbness, to be honest, to get through some of that. And a few lucky ones like myself with the right mentorship and the support around with colleagues around the table, you'll get to that point when they really realize, actually, this is what should have happened. Sadly, with consequence this time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the life cycle of a technological company. because it will start to make sense where the problems are. This is the Gartner cycle. Most of you will know this. But we have issues about the beginning. It gets exciting, right? Clinicians get excited. Oh my God, what's that? That's great. Let me see that. I want to try that. I won't buy it, but let me have it for a little bit. Then it gets to the peak, and everybody's happy. The company's happy, the clinicians are happy. And then things start to happen because people start saying no. Because when you try to do things at scale and try to go into the NHS or other bodies, people start saying, wait a minute, where's the evidence? Does this work? What do you want me to do? Give this in the whole department? I don't think so. Then people just start saying no to you on email. Then people stop replying. Companies just sitting there waiting to try and see what happens. And then something trickles through, usually an event. And then people say, well, actually, we need this because we've got no other solution, so can we use it, please? And then you see a slight rise. And then it plateaus, which is funny because even though it might work, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to expand any further. So the translational gap, which is the key to all of this, what does that really mean? It means there's a difference between what the clinical people think is the problem and what the stakeholder or the organization that develops technology thinks is the problem. I'll give you an example. This is not evidence-based. This is just me. During the pandemic, Sainsbury's brought out the shopping with the phone. You know what I mean? You can just shop with your phone. You can scan it, bag it, and get out so you don't have to touch anything. And I thought to myself, but they've got those scanners. They spent all that money making those scanners. You can scan with one of those things the checkout people use, right? The little gun. Deet, deet. And I thought, why did you do the phone thing? And then I thought, hang on a minute. Why didn't you just do the phone thing in the first place? Because we've all got phones, we've all got smartphones. Why do you need the gun? And now all of a sudden the guns are redundant. So do you see, they thought the problem was the checkouts. And the problem wasn't the checkouts. The problem was the consumer wanted something on their person to get in and out quick. People like me just want to do it on my phone, pay on my phone, and get out of Sainsbury's. So I've got nothing against Sainsbury's, by the way. But yeah, the point is, you have to think of what the problem is from all angles before you tackle it. So there's a gap between what the companies, the technology, and the devices are doing and what we're doing as clinicians. And then, of course, let's not forget the person using the service, because we're all patients, right? So you'll have your own experiences that needs to go into that co-production. Part of it is the evidence framework that we use at the moment is not fit for digital technology. You can't go into technology and say, well, I need 10 years of evidence before I'm willing to deploy that. It doesn't work like that, I'm afraid. Technology moves so fast, that it's impossible to keep up. So now academic institutions need to change the way in which they support the evidence framework by doing ongoing evaluation, sandboxing, so that you have safe scenarios where you can do some of this work over the course of 1 to 2 years and start to deploy it. We kind of do this in research. So my view is R&D will become more R&I for the future. And the development is just the undertone. Everything's developing. So it's really important to understand that as we go along. And problem solving, you need to talk, the two systems need to talk to each other and understand what the real problem is. Technology is often so fast that it's developed without the clinical input, and then they say, well, we need a clinician to help us deliver this. And by that time when they knock on my door, I say, well, what's the point of telling me? Because I don't think that's the problem. The problem's something completely different. We need to fix that. And they'll say, but we spent millions making that. And I say, well, you should have asked in the first place. So we need to get in there quick and advise the right people about what we need to do. There is some framework out there, the NICE guidance is cut off at the top, but basically this is the evidence framework for digital health that was brought up by NICE. You know what the problem with this is? People on the ground don't understand this. This is great strategically for those sitting in senior leadership, but it doesn't help the people on the ground know. So if I gave this to someone alongside a kit to a clinician and said, hey, would you like to use this? They wouldn't get it. They wouldn't know what to do with this to translate it back to what they do. So we are missing a whole group of things around support and understanding of how to deliver technology. I mentioned earlier, technically what they call me is a systems and transformation medical director. Why do they call me that? Because these are the things that I've learned over time that make a big difference to not just one patient, not tens, not 50s, we're talking hundreds of thousands, millions. How do you tweak one thing and the whole lot get changed and you affect as many people as possible? And nowadays, even with the global work I do, it's the same thing on a country level to say, do this small change and everybody gets the benefit of it. But to do that, you need all of these things. You need to understand human factors, risk, training, and you need to understand how everything fits together. And don't forget culture. It's really important. Taking the people with you, right? It's really important. These are the steps that typically I go through with an organization and say, these are the things you need to think about before we start making the step towards adopting technology. Get it under your door first. You need to know what the environment's doing. You need to understand your population. You need to understand how risk is. Teach your people risk. That's really important. They need to get the tools so that they can figure out how the technology works for their field. You don't go in and tell them, here's 25 conditions that you can't treat or you can treat. What you say is, here's how you figure out what works for you, and they are better equipped to do that in the future. A bit like Maslow's, there's a hierarchy of what you need to adopt digital successfully. And part of that is around making sure that people are literate, understand the processes that everybody needs, and give them the understanding and resource so they can get on with what they do. All of this goes into the sandbox. Slight example, during COVID, I used to come home and a very small table of thought leaders sat there and said, whoa, there must be lots of education globally. This is before we were getting any feed educationally from abroad. Lucky enough to be around some people, we set up this thing. And in 7 days, we had some of the best gamification studios in the world building 3D basic life support simulation. 7 days. From my writing to animation to 3D rendering so that you can sit wherever you are and figure out how do I do basic life support for people who are COVID positive. 7 days, can you imagine? Can you imagine doing that in the NHS, 7 days? Be lucky if you can get the computer working by then. So really important that we can do some of this. And this is what we sort of started producing. We could tell exactly what we're doing. There's a whole video and things which you can look up yourself in your own time. Now the challenge is education. So for me, the education is about equipping people with the right knowledge of all of those things I've talked about so that they can go away and work out in their relative specialties and fields what works, how can I use that device for my population. Don't go in and tell them how to do it. Teach them where to do it. And this is all coming in the future. We just put this technology into one of the trusts where I am involved in. Just that red t-shirt chap there. Using thermal imaging with a scanner in their room, it takes your vitals. There's papers in the NIHR about them, Oxy Health. It's amazing. We're now teaching anatomy virtually in the VR world. My wife, who may be listening, she's always listening, but will tell you I live in my own world all the time. But I live in this virtual world. It's incredible. When I got taught anatomy, I had to go and drill into the ears and have a look at those small bones. Now I can walk on them. How crazy is that? I can really just, in this space, start to do some amazing bits of education with my students. They come in virtually into the metaverse, and people like Shafi Ahmed, who I have the privilege of working alongside, we built these little university-type models where they can come into the virtual world, learn and listen to lectures and the anatomy as well as surgical procedures. In the bottom right, you'll see marks on axial points of the skeleton. This is a technology that's amazing. You literally stand in front of it and you do the movements that it tells you, and it maps out what your range of movement is in your joints and your muscles, and it diagnoses you with the potential. So actually, you don't actually need to come and see me anymore. For musculoskeletal injuries, this is phenomenal. It tells you where the likelihood of problem is. You self-refer into a physio, boom. But what's the problem? They built it without the clinicians. The clinicians had said to them in the beginning, these are the problems, these are the things. The MSK service will only adopt it if you do X, Y, and Z. Then it would have worked a lot better. So they pivoted slightly. They've changed their tact. Technology is amazing. It works, just needs someone to figure out how to teach people how to use it. And then and only then, the technology will support the people to get out of this well, because that's what it should be. It should be a supportive mechanism to get out of that deep, dark place when someone gives you something that you're not prepared for, or something that you have no knowledge how to use. I hope that I've given you a few pointers about what the future looks like. It's very exciting, but equally it's a responsibility we all have to make sure that in our fields, our respected subject matters, that you think about those key things. Think about the fact that we've gone through a pandemic with little training and support beforehand. We haven't quite understood what risk is, and we should be prepared to do more of that training and understanding. And think about the consequences of producing something without your colleagues and your end users when you're building technology, when you're working with technology, when you're researching technology. And think, what does it mean to really do systems and transformation for everyone, not just the individual? Thank you.
Mateen, thank you very much indeed. I mean, sorry, it's a bit of an echo. Can you all get onto Slido and start asking questions on Slido, and I will then put them to Mateen. But while you're all doing that, there's something I would like to ask you, and it's about two things here. First of all, I think there's an extraordinary sort of a journey through technological innovation and implementation. Second thing is actually what are the general lessons that we can learn about implementation that we can take to other areas of healthcare. Because I think it was one of Matt's teams the other day at a management meeting said that the translational gap was 17 years. In my day it was 10 years, so I'm a bit anxious that things have gone on. So I'm just wondering, what do you think the general lessons might be that we can take from this to the areas of the translational gap in general, not just technology?
I think ultimately it comes about understanding systems. I think we're ill-equipped to understand systems, so wherever you go, take that knowledge from what's happening in an organization. And sometimes as clinicians, we're focused on the individual too much. And that's normal. You really want to care for an individual. But actually, when you do that, you're not seeing the peripheral of what's going on. So it's really important that we walk away and think about what the impact is on a system and how we can contribute to that. And to be successful in all of that, I think risk learning is something we should all do when we walk away today. Find the opportunities to learn that so that that implements locally to the work that we do.
Another challenge for you. You've mentioned education, training, learning at various times through your talk. Arguably, we are very, very good at teaching individual clinicians to look after individual patients. I think we're pretty good at that. I would also argue that we fail completely to teach clinicians to look after the system of care. What you have been talking about is a system of care. And by failing to teach clinicians how to look after the system of care, we thereby fail individual patients. How can we continue, obviously, our teaching about looking after individuals to the training that seems to be important for managing and changing the system of care? Because if we don't do that, we're going to get the same old, and the translational gap is going to continue to get larger.
You're absolutely right. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to one thing and one thing alone, is healthcare management needs to become part of training postgraduate for clinicians who are CCTing or coming out of their training posts. It's really, really important that we understand healthcare management, which is not just the HR and the finance and everything else. It's more about understanding people and the problems that we have as an organization. So if I was going to do one thing, Fiona, there's no doubt I would bring that into the curriculum for postgraduate training. I think it's too early to do it in undergrad, because really by then the focus is more about knowing the knowledge of your training and your subject matter. But when you come out of postgraduate training, and those of you who are more experienced and come out the other end of that training, you'll realize you're not equipped and ready to deal with departments and systems. So I would change that going forward is just that's where the focus should be.
I've got two questions from the floor. Both of them are about risk. One asks you which risk learning tools would you recommend? And the other is about how can we improve risk prediction using technology?
Well, okay. So the first one, there's no right answer, to be honest. There are plenty of options about risk management training. I would say pick one that does human factors and involves cognitive neurosciences as part of that training, because what it teaches you is not just recognizing risk that you do on a managerial level, but actually clinically, what does it mean on people? And I think so there are, if you look them up, there are plenty of training courses. Some of the references are in my slides, so feel free to look at those. In terms of technology and risk prediction, it's already there. It's more about machine learning, and machine learning is only as good as the data that goes in. And because we are decades behind, Fiona, one of the things we really need to do is make sure every time we learn as seniors, we are inputting into some machine learning mechanism so that the data is predictable after a number of iterations. And there are a number of technologies, I won't name companies, but we know there are risk prediction tools out there that are very good. We do it in chronic disease management quite well, actually. Most of those studies and formulas are built around data input. So we need to start doing that from a system level into technological companies, dare I say, who partner with the right ethics and morals with the NHS and other sectors to understand what does it mean if an organisation sees 10 red flags, and what does it mean for the clinician and the users at the end of that system. So I would say be careful about what you learn and make sure it's got an element of clinical oversight into it. So best courses will teach you human factors and neurosciences cognitively around that, so that you can put the right risk profile with the right people.
And here's a question. In fact, there's a poster that addresses this to some extent. This is a question that's got some likes. How do we improve digital adoption amongst the digitally excluded population?
Oh, it's a very important question. Digital enablement is the key, and I think what you find is actually if we focus on helping people get through that barrier, that's mostly it. But ultimately it's a hybrid model. It doesn't mean this is the only solution, right? When you go shopping, you don't just have one solution. There are different things for different people. We need to do that in healthcare. We need to have different doors for different people, and we need to allow them to pick what they think is appropriate for them. So we shouldn't exclude anyone, is the answer.
People are excluded. I mean, I mean, in a sense, people can become digitally active and then become digitally excluded.
Yes.
I'm just thinking my 99-year-old mum, who was doing internet banking, but now is actually not able, is now actually effectively digitally excluded. It's interesting watching someone move from being someone who uses it at an odd age. But I think digital exclusion is hugely, hugely important, because it's not just the clinicians that have to be able to use it, but it is surface users as well. And again, there's a post that I would direct people to by Rupa Parekh, who's looking at MSK in Central London community teams, and a fantastic website that they have that she has developed during her fellowship. But it's a really important I think part of this, because everyone gets excited and then we forget that we're leaving people behind. There's a couple more questions. A lot's coming through, and I think we're able to keep these questions, aren't we? And so we can use them in some way, sort of after this event. Someone sort of an interesting question here, I think, for this group, which is: do we have too high a bar for evidence in healthcare, or do we need a quicker or better evaluations of digital technologies? I mean, it is interesting because, I mean, as a clinician, the randomised controlled trial is it's up there. But do we have too high a bar, and should we have a different bar for digital technologies?
No doubt. I think the question answers itself. We should be. Because you need to keep up with the pace of what's happening externally, but equally, safety is paramount. So if we're in charge of that process and we can build it so that we take small measured steps, evaluating as we go along, and have the ability to pull out when we need to, whilst keeping good communication and transparency with the users, that's the key to all of this. And you'll be surprised, the population at large is not the barrier. They will be happy to try things if you give them the right information and they take the right informed decision. So definitely the bar has to change.
Mateen, I think our time is out now. I'd just like to thank you very much indeed for giving us an extraordinary sort of romp through sort of your experience of introducing digital technologies. It is a conversation that actually will run and run and run and one that I hope that we will keep going. And it's lessons not just for digital implementation, but for implementation in general. Somehow we've got to work out how we get across that second translational gap. Interesting looking at sort of who we all are here today. One group that we haven't actually excluded, we don't often see here, and maybe part of the key to it is there aren't many people who would describe themselves primarily as managers at these meetings, and just wondering if actually a better connection, maybe learning together with our managerial colleagues might help us with changing the system enough so that we can really cross that translational gap. Maybe there's some ideas here for how we might build capacity. Mateen, you're staying for the whole time. You're going to be on the panel at the end, so anyone whose questions weren't answered, he's going to be here, so please do ask him. But thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.